Hi there. This is Master Control. Right now, I'm going to be doing deck tech on Tasigur. Aerodaz and I have been working on this deck for a little while now, and we're just trying to perfect it. Tasigur is 6 mana. It has Delve, which means when you cast it, you can exile cards from your graveyard to help with its casting cost. It's a 4/5, and its ability is 4 mana, 2 blue or 2 green. Put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a non-land card of an opponent's choice from your graveyard to your hand. So what I like about Tasigur, as opposed to, let's say, Damia, is he's really, really easy to get out. Quite often you can cast him on 3rd turn for practically 1 mana. And also when you use his casting cost, you're weeding out the cards that you don't want to return to your hand with his ability from your graveyard, which is really nice. I find Damia is more high risk, high reward. So you get her out if you can protect her, and if you get her out, you draw 7, and it would be hard not to win the game at that point. Whereas Tasigur, I find that you can pretty much cast him as many times as you want. He's easy to get out, and if he gets countered, like, great, you'll just cast him in 2 or 3 more turns, and you've just gotten a card out of your opponent's hand. I find him exceptionally good in a control matchup. He's a little bit weaker in an aggro matchup. His ability, although it's pretty heavy, it's pretty nice for a control build, because if you attack with him, and then go your opponent's turn, and you have all your mana up. If they don't cast a threat that you have to counter or deal with in some way, you can just use his ability and get a card from your graveyard. It's going to be the worst card in your graveyard, or what your opponent thinks is the worst card, but it's still generating card advantage. Yeah. So it's a very reactive deck. I'll go through the lands first off. I have Ancient Tomb, Bayou. I have all the fetch lands. I won't bother going through those. I have Jukabog. It's pretty straightforward. A card that I like in this build is Cephalid Colosseum. It has Threshold, which means that if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, well, you can use the ability. The ability is pay 1 mana, sack it, draw 3 cards, discard 3 cards. So it's very easy with our build to get cards in your graveyard. And not only are you throwing this in your graveyard, but you're drawing 3 more cards and discarding 3 more cards, which gives more fuel to Tasigur. If you have a way to get the Colosseum back, like with Light from the Loam or something, it's just profit. Dust Bowl, to host your opponent's land. Lonely Sandbar, I'll go into that a little bit more when I talk about my Intuition package and Light from the Loam. Strip Mine is an important one for this build. It's probably one of the top most important cards for this build. Once again, that's a Light from the Loam Intuition thing. Tectonic Edge, Wasteland, and that pretty much sums up the important lands. I do have Mana Crypt in this build. It's good. This deck is fairly low curve, so it has less effect, but I'm never unhappy to see it in my opening hand. Ancestral Vision, obviously. This deck has a lot of 1-drops. I also have... Oh, okay, so I have Mental Missteps in this deck. This is specifically to counter 1 mana cost spells. Obviously, that's the only thing you can counter. Mental Missteps is one of those cards that, if I'm against a competitive deck, it really, really shines. If I'm against just an aggro deck or a casual player, I don't get much use out of it, although stopping a turn 1 Soul Ring is usually beneficial. I find a lot of people keep a lukewarm hand just because they have Soul Ring, and that just stops the game for them. Brainstorm, Mystical Tutor, Spell Pierce, Stifle. It's pretty straightforward. I really like Stubborn Denial in this build. This just came out in the new set. It's 1 mana. You can counter target non-creature spell unless the controller pays 1. It also has Ferocious, so if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which is our general, it just counters that spell outright, so it could be a negate for 1. I find that in our build we get Tasigur out a little more than 50% of the time we're in a game, just because I think our opponents at some point realize, the more I kill this, the more it's got to come out, or the more cards I waste. So Suburb Denial I really like in this build. We have Thought Scour in this build. Thought Scour is a unique card in that if you're playing a competitive player and they like Vampiric Tutor or Imperial Seal on the first turn, you can just mill that card into the graveyard. And if they don't, you can just mill yourself and draw a card. So you're fueling your commander, and you're drawing a card. Entomb allows you to put any card from your library into your graveyard. So usually we would put Life from the Loam to our graveyard with that. That would be the target. I'll go into that in a bit. Strip Mine, of course, if you have Crucible out. Or Raven's Crime if you just want to empty their hand, and I'll go into that in a second. Actually, right now. Raven's Crime is 1 mana. Target player discards a card and has Retrace, which means you can discard a card from your hand. Sorry, a land from your hand, rather. Pay its mana cost and have them discard a card. That's part of an intuition pile as well, and I'll go with that in a second. Deathrite Shaman. I'm not too sure about this card. I'm still sort of testing it out. Initially, this was meant to even out your graveyard so you can get more profit with Tasigur. But the more I play Tasigur, the more I sort of find that Tasigur's ability is not necessarily tutoring like a card in your graveyard, because it's quite often to pinpoint a specific card you want and get your opponent to put it in your hand. This, of course, allows that likelihood to be a lot more. But I find Tasigur, his ability is just more fuel. It's just card advantage. Like if you have a counter up and they don't do anything important, you can 4 mana, and if they return a counter to your hand, you're that much more ahead. If they return, Beast Within, same thing. Since they Divine Chop, Soul Ring, those are pretty straightforward. Into the Royal, we have this in our build because we find once a Planeswalker resolves, for our deck, it's really difficult to get rid of it. So one of the main ways we do that is returning it to someone's hand. And we have a bunch of discard, so when it's returned to their hand, we can most likely get it out. Okay, just your standard package of counterspells: Mana Leak, Negate, Remand, Counterspell, Mana Drain, Muddle the Mixture, rather. That's Transmute, which means you can basically tutor for any 2-drop in your deck. We have quite a few 2-drops, and some are extremely important in this build, like Life for the Loam. We have Chainer's Edict as well. If that gets put in your graveyard, you can flash it back. We have Tuark, pretty straightforward. Regrowth is very important in this build for what I feel are obvious reasons. Okay, so Life from the Loam. This card is probably the most important card for our deck. It's not a combo deck, so it doesn't rely on this card. Although if you get this in your graveyard, it's very difficult not to win from that point. If you get it early on, of course. Life from the Loam was 2 mana. Return 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. And it's dredged 3, which means instead of drawing a card at any point, you can return this card to your hand and mill the top 3 cards of your library. So initially, you create fuel to put out Tasigur, and then when you cast Life from the Loam, you can recur some of the lands that we're going to be using to great effect, like Strip Mine, Lonely Sandbar, which is cycling 1, which means you can just pay 1 mana to draw a card with it and put it back in your library. It also fuels things like Forbid. So if you have Forbid in your hand, which is a counterspell with buyback, discard 2, you basically create a lock. If you have 3, 4, 5 mana, you'll have 1 counterspell of a turn. It also excels with the Colosseum, because you can draw 3, discard 3 every turn. So yeah, that's very important to our build. If you get it early and just get like a Strip Mine lock, Resource Denial and Commander is one of the best ways to win early on. Okay, some more counterspells. Exclude, Forbid, I just talked about that. We have Fabricate to fetch up swords, Crucible, Sensei's Divine Top, Soul Ring, or Mana Crypt. Toxic Deluge, pretty straightforward. Yawgmoth's Will, obviously this comes in handy a little bit later in the game. The ability to play any card from your graveyard. Obviously, all these cards you've seen, we want to recur. I mean, that's the theme of the deck. Pernicious Steed, Maelstrom Pulse, Beast Within, just standard removal. Putrefy, Crucible of Worlds. Crucible of Worlds, I don't think I need to go into too much detail about it. Strip Mine, Dust Bowl, Tectonic Edge, it's all good. Sword and Feast and Famine. Now this is a card that we've had a little bit trouble deciding on whether we should put in our deck. We eventually decided to include it because it makes Tasigur a little more of a threat. We have Tasigur out quite often, and if you equip it to him, attack with him, not only are you getting a card to their hand, making Sword and Feast and Famine immediately a 1-for-1. I mean, when you hit, I shouldn't say immediately. But on their turn, if they don't do a threat, you have all your mana up to use his ability. So it pays for itself more than double by the end of your opponent's next turn. So we're still testing it. I quite like it the more I play it. Factor Fiction, just card advantage. Jace, card advantage. I like Venusaur in this build once again to get rid of Planeswalkers, and it's a pretty good tempo play if you go first. Cryptic Command, I don't really need to go into that. It's just all around utility. Damnation is pretty straightforward. Cura is another card that we've been testing. It's sorry, just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Cura is a card that we've been trying recently. This is another one that it's been difficult to decide to include it. Cura is pretty competitively costed. If we put it out, we can prevent, I guess, a threat. We would usually want to play this on an empty board. -5 can't really be ignored. That's how we would win some of our games. This deck doesn't really have a lot of win conditions. Quite often we just get general damage with Tasigur because this deck is so control, and Tasigur is out quite often. Force of Will, not much to say about that. Dig Through Time. This is another card that sort of shines in this deck. It has Delve, which means when you cast it, you can exile cards from your graveyard. This fuels Tasigur's ability, makes it more, I guess, accurate when you want your opponent to put a card in your hand. And you look at the top 7 cards, put the 2 of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library. It's very good. Condescend, Logic Knot. Logic Knot has Delve as well. Mind Twist, pretty straightforward, and Skeletal Scrying. That's just a draw spell that takes damage. One thing that this deck does is a lot of damage to you. So if you're playing it, you have to mitigate the life gain. We don't have any life gain in this deck except for Deathrite Shaman. So you really want to be careful you're not killing yourself. Saying that, your opponents usually don't get threats to stick for very long. So it mitigates it significantly. Anyways, I hope. I forgot to mention earlier in the video one of our key combo pieces, Intuition. Intuition allows you to search for 3 cards in your library, and your opponent puts one of them into your hand. So our Intuition package is Life from the Loam, Strip Mine, and Raven's Crime. This allows us to recur Raven's Crime and basically get a discard lock with Life from the Loam. If Strip Mine is not effective, like let's say if they have a lot of lands and you can't really contain their mana situation anymore, it might be more prudent to get Lonely Sandbar instead. So that way, every time you recur Life from the Loam, you can cycle Lonely Sandbar and not lose your draw. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed.